"You don't live here anymore, you freeloading old man." That's what I heard the moment I came back from my trip. The smell of the sea was still on my clothes, and I held a bag of small gifts in my hand. The front gate was half open, my shirts thrown across the yard like trash, the TV blasting from inside, and my son Daniel stood at the doorway with his face red in anger and his arms folded. I froze for a couple of seconds, unable to understand. At first I thought it was some kind of joke, but when he tossed my veteran's cap on the ground and turned away, I knew it wasn't. And the worst part is, I also knew why. The truth is, he couldn't bear to see me happy. The smile I carried back from the ocean was enough to show me who he really was. My name is Henry Walker. I am 73 years old, with a back full of years, a lifetime of hard work, but no shame on my face. I was a union electrician for more than 40 years. I started with Local 58 in Detroit after Vietnam, and later worked as an independent contractor. I pulled wires in mansions, fixed power in trailer parks, and reconnected light for neighbors who wouldn't even greet me. I bought the house where Daniel now lives with his mother, my late wife, when he was still a child. After she died of cancer, I carried on alone. I gave him food, shelter, and dignity. I never let him go without. He grew up in that house, studied there, got married there, and even though the deed stayed in my name, I never used it against him. I always believed family was for love, not for control. But maybe I was wrong. Before I go on with this story, I want to thank the Father's Advice channel for giving me this chance to share what I went through. And if this story touches your heart, I ask you to subscribe, leave a comment with where you're listening from, and share it with someone who needs to think about respect and dignity. Every day, there's a new story here, and this is mine. Winning that trip to Myrtle Beach was something I never expected. The VFW chaplain had nominated me for a veterans rest program, 3 nights, 4 days at a beachfront inn with breakfast included. They said it was for veterans who had been caregivers, and my years caring for Evelyn through her cancer counted. It was the first time anyone ever recognized that sacrifice. I almost didn't go. I thought it was better to stay home quietly and not cause trouble, but something deep inside told me I deserved it. So I went. I packed a small bag with 2 pairs of shorts, 3 t-shirts, and an old heart ready to see the ocean. I walked the mornings with my feet in the wet sand, listened to live music at a craft fair, ate fried fish with my hands, and drank sweet tea as I watched the sun set. For the first time in years, I felt peace. I felt like a man again, alive again. I was more than just a father or grandfather. I even brought back a little blue bracelet for my Ethan, a fridge magnet that said, "If you're stressed, go see the ocean," which made me smile, and a small bottle with sand and shells for the living room shelf. I came back home excited, tired, but light in spirit. Yet the moment I stepped through the gate, my heart sank. My clothes were scattered all over the yard. My son stood there with his arms crossed, saying I was disturbing their routine, that I had left without notice, that I gave nothing to the house, and from now on it would be better if I found another place. I was frozen, speechless. My Ethan looked at me through the window and waved. Claire did not even show her face. Maybe she had given up for good, but I didn't argue, didn't beg. I bent down and picked up my clothes one by one, brushed off the dirt with the same calm I once used to clean Daniel's face when he fell off the swing at 4 years old. I stuffed everything into a garbage bag and walked toward the bus stop. Sitting on the bench, I thought, this isn't the first time life has knocked me down, but maybe it will be the last time I let someone treat me as nothing. Because what Daniel never knew, and perhaps never even guessed, is that this freeloading old man had a place of his own. An apartment I bought years ago, back when I had overtime and saved whatever I could. It was small, plain, in an old building near the station, but it was mine. And more than just mine, it was the only place I could truly be myself. It was where I brought company after Evelyn passed, where I listened to vinyl with my eyes shut, where I sat in silence mourning her death. I had never told anyone about it, not even him. When I walked inside, the smell of the sea still clung to my hair. I opened the window and let the breeze in. I made myself strong black coffee, just the way I like it, and washed my clothes in a bucket with dish soap. Then I sat in my old recliner, stared at the wall with the 2015 calendar still hanging, and thought, so this is it. I had been thrown out of the house I had built with my own hands. But now it was time to remember who I was. My old friend Walter Briggs, a fellow veteran from my union days, now worked in property law and handled documents. I asked him to check some old papers. There was something Daniel had no idea about, something that would change everything. The house where Daniel lived with his wife, and my Ethan was still in my name. It always had been. I had never transferred it because I believed respect would be stronger than paper. But now, paper was all I had left, and if Daniel wanted to act like the owner, he would have to prove it in court, because from that moment on, the true owner would decide who lived there. And I had already made up my mind that I would no longer let myself be treated like a burden. As the sun sank behind the city buildings, I looked into my coffee mug and saw my own story in its reflection. Yes, I was old, tired, and my face lined with the marks of time, but I was still the man who worked rainy nights fixing power lines in rough neighborhoods. Still the father who once sold his bike so his son could have a school uniform. Still Henry Walker, and nobody was going to trample on that name again. It was there, in the silence of that lonely apartment, that I began to do what Daniel never saw coming. That night I stayed in silence. I didn't cry, though the pain cut deep. It burned inside me, but I've shed too many tears in my life to waste them when they couldn't change a thing. Instead, I sat in the recliner, listening to the ceiling fan spin slowly above me, each turn like time whispering, "Stay steady, Henry Walker. The choice is yours now." Daniel's words kept echoing in my mind. Freeloading old man. Not dad, not pop, the names he once used when he wanted money. No, now I was nothing more than a nuisance he wanted gone, like weeds pulled from a yard. And the worst part was how easy it was for him, not even a flicker of shame in his eyes, which made me wonder where I had gone wrong. The next morning I rose early as always. My body never learned how to sleep late. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee in the old drip machine I had stored away and ate stale bread spread with butter. Outside, the city was slowly waking. The streets and buildings looked almost the same as when I first bought that apartment more than 40 years ago. It had always been a place I refused to give up. Daniel never even knew it existed. Back then I called it my refuge, and that's exactly what it became, a private corner for me. When grief came crashing, that's where I hid. After Evelyn passed, I sometimes brought company there. Nothing serious. It was simply a place to breathe, to think. And now it was where I would begin again. Around 9, the phone rang. It was Walter Briggs. His gravelly voice carried the kind of firmness I needed. "Henry Walker, everything checks out. The property is still under your name. Taxes, deed, title, all untouched. Daniel never transferred a thing because there was never a transfer." I exhaled. Not with relief, but with certainty. I had always known it. Daniel assumed that because I was old, quiet, and living under the same roof, I had given up everything. But the truth was clear. The house was still mine. He was only occupying it, and by pushing me out, he had awakened something he never expected. I'm not a man who seeks revenge. That was never my way. But I do not lower my head to an ungrateful son. I asked Walter to prepare the papers. Nothing dramatic, just a formal notice, a reminder of who still held the rights. He agreed instantly, saying he'd draft it and email it to me for signature, and that I could even demand full possession or eviction if I wanted. But I told him to wait. Not yet. I needed time to think. That afternoon, I walked through the city, bought some fruit, a toothbrush, and a towel. On the way, I met people who reminded me of the man I was. A butcher recognized me. "Mr. Henry Walker. You're the one who fixed our wiring when I was a kid, remember? My father used to talk about you all the time." I smiled. Out there, no one saw me as a burden. They saw me as an example, and at that moment I realized it wasn't me who was lost in the world. It was Daniel. It was Daniel who had lost his way, not me. Back at the apartment, I took a shower, slipped into an old button-down shirt, and sat on the balcony watching the afternoon fade. My mind wandered to every detail of the house I had built with my own hands, the wall I painted alone, the stove I installed, the bills I scraped together to pay. I remembered Daniel's crib, his very first day of school, the night he crashed his bike and I stayed awake beside him in the hospital, holding his hand until morning. I recalled the day he got his first job and hugged me while crying with joy. And then I faced the truth. The same boy who once called me his hero now looked at me as a burden. Later that evening, I opened the email Walter Briggs had sent and signed the document online. It was plain, short, but enough. It stated that the house where Daniel lived was still under my name, and from that moment on he was officially informed that its use was under my decision. I didn't demand eviction yet. I only wanted to remind him, with proper letterhead and notarized signature, that the man he had pushed aside was still the rightful owner. In the following days, Daniel kept silent. No calls, no messages, and I didn't reach out either. A son who throws his father out the door doesn't earn the right to apologize through a phone. What I didn't know was that one simple notice would shake him more than anything else. When he read the document, he lost control. That's when the calls began. The first one I let ring. I stared at the old cell phone screen and didn't move. It was Daniel. Late at night, I ignored it. Half an hour later, another call. I ignored that too. By 2 in the morning, the phone vibrated again. I stared at his name flashing as if I were looking at my past face to face. This wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was panic. The kind of panic that only comes when pride collides with a wall. And me, I had always been that wall. Quiet, but unshakable. By morning, the screen showed 23 missed calls. Then came the message, "Dad, we need to talk. Call me, please." I didn't call. At first it filled me with both pain and relief. Pain that we had reached this point, but relief because I was finally standing firm on my own ground, no longer bending just to be allowed a place in his world. On Monday, Walter rang me again, laughing as he spoke. He said their office phone hadn't stopped ringing since the letter arrived at Daniel's house. "Henry Walker, your son's gone mad. He called here nearly 10 times, desperate to know if you're really taking legal action. I told him exactly what you wanted, that the document is official but no eviction notice yet. That's all." Walter's voice carried a tone of respect, one Daniel had forgotten to use for years. I turned on the radio. An old country tune played, the kind Evelyn and I loved when we were young, when we dreamed of a future filled with open windows. I sat with bitter coffee in my hands, thinking about how time has a way of flipping everything upside down. The boy I once carried in my arms now called me in fear, not out of love, but because he was afraid of losing what was never his. The same son who once called me his hero now saw me as nothing more than an old freeloader who needed to go. But he had forgotten one important truth: the house still belonged to me. 2 days later, I heard a knock at my apartment door. It was the doorman. "Mr. Henry Walker, there's a young man downstairs who says he's your son. Should I let him up?" I paused for a moment before answering. I told him no. If Daniel wanted to speak, he could write me a letter. Yes, a letter. I wanted to see if he remembered how to put pen to paper. 3 hours later, the doorman returned with an envelope. My name was written in the corner, in handwriting I recognized instantly. I opened it slowly. The letter was brief. "Dad, I overreacted. I was harsh and stressed from work. I shouldn't have said those things. But you don't need all this: lawyers, documents, notices. The house is yours, of course you know that. But it's my home too. It's Ethan's, it's Claire's. I don't want a fight. Let's talk. Call me when you can." I set the letter on the table without anger, only with honesty. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. When he threw my clothes into the yard, he didn't stop to think. He never wondered where I would sleep what I would eat, or if I had anywhere to go. Now that a piece of paper reminded him that the roof above his head was never his, suddenly he wanted peace. But it was too late for that. Too late to pretend it was all a mistake. That wasn't stress, it was contempt. And the answers he wanted he'd find in his own reflection, not in me. That week I began to care for my apartment like a home again. I bought a new tablecloth, swept every corner slowly, and hung a painting I had made years ago. I pulled out my old account book and found receipts from when I first bought Daniel's house. 72 payments, not a single one late. I remembered each contractor I hired, the wooden deck I built with my own hands, the cement bought in small installments. And I remembered the day Daniel once said, "Dad, someday this house will be mine." Back then I foolishly replied, "It already is, son." But that was a lie. I said it out of love. Yet love alone cannot hold up walls or protect dignity. As the days passed, his calls grew fewer. Maybe he realized I wouldn't run back like I had before when he first spoke harshly, and I forgave him. Not this time. I stayed in my space, made friends with an elderly couple in apartment 2010 who invited me to play checkers, started morning walks in the park again, and bought myself a new battery-powered radio. I returned to being Henry Walker, the man I had been before, trying to squeeze into lives that didn't value me. Then one day came an unexpected knock. It wasn't Daniel. It was Claire, standing with lowered eyes, holding an orange bundt cake wrapped in a dish towel. I stepped aside and let her in without a word. She set the cake on the table and stayed close to the door, her hands tight together. "Mr. Henry Walker, I had no idea he would do that. I swear, when you left, I was shocked. I thought he'd run after you, but instead he grew angrier. He said you needed to learn your place. But since the letter arrived, he hasn't been the same. He can't sleep. He keeps pacing. I know he fears losing the house, but you're right. What he did was wrong. And if you want to see Ethan, he misses you dearly." I looked at her and slowly nodded. "Claire, I don't hate you, but I've learned that love without respect is nothing more than hidden abuse. I won't return, and I won't throw you out either. But Daniel must come to me as a man, as a son, not as if he owns that house." She nodded softly, whispered a thank you, and left. I didn't see tears, but I saw shame in her eyes, and sometimes that is where change begins. That night, I lay down with a restless heart, not heavy, not light, only honest. The silence in the room wrapped me like an old blanket. With my eyes closed, I thought, maybe he'll come back, maybe he won't. But now, the choice of how my story goes belongs to me. That same day, the phone rang with a number I didn't know. When I answered, a voice on the other end said, "Mr. Henry Walker, can you meet me tomorrow? It's about the property. I think you'll want to hear this face to face." The next morning, I was awake before dawn, hand pressed to my chest, mind racing over what that call could mean. The sun had barely lifted, yet I was already dressed. The voice had been formal, polite, but carried urgency. "It's about the property. You'll want to hear this in person." It wasn't Walter's voice, nor anyone I recognized. From the tone, it sounded like someone from a law office or title company. I put on my light blue button-down, the one I wore when I wanted to look steady, not weary. I polished my black shoes until they shined and headed out. I arrived at the address, a tall commercial tower in the middle of downtown. On the 6th floor, a kind young woman greeted me and soon led me into a room stacked high with books and files. Behind the desk sat a man with glasses and a sharp look, dressed in a blazer. He introduced himself as Richard Hale, an attorney representing a real estate company I had never heard of. Without wasting words, he opened a folder and slid it across. "Mr. Henry Walker, I'll be direct. There is activity happening concerning the property in your name, located in Pine Valley." I kept my face calm, though my chest tightened. He continued, "Recently, your son Daniel came to us. He claimed to be the owner, saying he had verbal permission to sell the property. He requested an evaluation and a purchase proposal to present to a client." The room grew still. I fixed my eyes on the lawyer and stood silent for several seconds, letting the weight of his words sink in. He tried to sell the house, I asked, my voice sharp. Richard Hale let out a steady breath before answering. Yes, sir. As soon as we began collecting documents and requested the title, we saw the property was under your name. That's when we decided to contact you directly. I'm sorry if this has caused you distress. Distress? This wasn't just trouble, it was betrayal. He had not only thrown me out of my own house, but now he had tried to sell it without my knowledge. I asked to see the file. Inside was proof, an attempt to open a proposal with Daniel listed as if he were representing the owner. No papers, no rights, only words and arrogance. I rose from my chair, fixed the button on my cuff, and said firmly, "Thank you for your honesty. I never signed, never gave permission, and he knows it. From now on, any movement regarding this property must go through me. Reject any attempt he makes to sell it." The lawyer nodded in agreement. I walked out of that office with heavy steps, blood pounding through my veins. Outside, the sun struck hard, burning against my neck. Betrayal stings, but greed never surprises me. When someone's heart fills with it, there is no bottom. Throwing his father out wasn't enough. He wanted profit from the very place he never built. I sat down on a park bench, opened my notebook, and wrote just 2 words, "Living will." It was time to calmly decide what would happen to everything I had worked for. Back at the apartment near noon, I cooked rice with eggs and tomatoes. I let the plate cool as my mind spun in circles. I switched on the radio, but the songs faded into background noise. My eyes drifted to the old wall calendar, and memories filled the silence. I remembered taking Daniel to Clark's office years ago to register Ethan's birth. His smile that day was pure, and I knew it was real. There was still a son's heart in him back then. But now he was a man blinded by speed, by pride, by his hunger to prove he could be greater than his father. And maybe what burned him most was the truth, that no matter what he achieved, he still lived under a roof built by my own hands. That afternoon, Walter Briggs called. I told him everything. For a moment he said nothing, then asked, "Henry Walker, what will you do?" For the first time I had a clear answer. I'll let him stumble on his own greed, but before that, I'll make sure he knows who's in charge. I asked Walter to prepare a document with 2 clauses. First, forbidding any attempt to sell or transfer the property without my direct permission. Second, a notice stating that from now on, any other person living there would need a new contract with me. It was stronger, clearer, but still fair. Later that evening, I went downstairs to visit Mrs. Martha from 22. She and her husband, Albert, invited me in for coffee and biscuits. For the first time in months, I laughed freely. We shared stories, spoke of our children, our worries, even our medicines. During our talk, she suddenly held my hand and whispered, "Mr. Henry Walker, you have eyes people respect. You carry strength in them. One day, your son will realize what he lost." I smiled at her kindness, but stayed quiet, because deep inside, I already knew the truth. Daniel was going to lose far more than he imagined. That night, I didn't bother with the pillow. I leaned back in the recliner and drifted into uneasy sleep. I dreamed of my house, the walls, the bricks, the faded blue paint on the front. In the dream, I walked inside, but it was empty. No furniture, no laughter, not even Ethan's voice. Only silence, and in that silence came the echo of those cruel words, "Freeloading old man." I woke up sweating, but clear in my mind. If Daniel wanted war, I would answer with calm, but this calm would be something he'd have to choke on quietly. The next day, I went myself and placed the legal notice at the front gate. Daniel wasn't there, but Claire came out, pale as paper when she read it. "Is this the beginning?" she asked softly. I gave a weary smile. "No, it's the last warning." 3 hours later, my cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Once, twice, then 10 times. Long voice messages poured in, full of curses and rage. I didn't answer, didn't even open them. I flipped the phone face down on the kitchen table and let it ring until the battery went dead. If he wanted a reaction, He'd get the same one he gave me when he threw my clothes in the yard. Silence, but my silence carried weight. My silence had documents, seals, and signatures. By late afternoon, my doorbell rang 3 sharp times, the kind that demands, not asks. I rose slowly, took a deep breath, and opened the door. There he was, Daniel, face red, hair messy, phone still in his hand. He barged forward, finger pointed, voice shaking between anger and fear. "What is this, Dad? You trying to prove something? You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone?" His throat was tight, his eyes caught between shouting and begging. I didn't flinch. I stared at him until his words ran dry. Then I asked quietly, "Did you come here alone, or did greed bring you?" He sucked in air, his voice lowering, though his anger still pulsed in his neck. "Dad, I get it. The house is yours. Fine. But you've cornered me. Claire's falling apart, and you sit there with your proud act. What do you want? For us to leave? For my son to end up without a roof?" I waited a moment before answering, pulling every ounce of strength into my voice. "You threw me into the yard, Daniel. You called me a freeloading old man in front of Ethan. You pointed at the gate like I was a stray dog trespassing in your home, and now you dare ask me what I want. I don't want a thing from you anymore. I just want you to remember the ground beneath your feet is still mine, and the roof above your head stands only because I allow it." He stumbled back a step, glanced around the room as if searching for words in the corners of the walls, but what filled the space instead was only his loss of control. "You're overreacting, Dad." It was just a moment. I was stressed. Work, money, everything piling up. When you left on that trip, I thought you weren't coming back. Claire panicked and said it was better that way, but I never wanted to hurt you. I gave a short, bitter laugh. Never wanted to hurt me, yet you had the nerve to try selling what was never yours. Or did you think I was too old to notice? He stayed silent, slumped into the chair on the balcony, buried his face in his hands, and said nothing. For the first time, he looked small. For the first time, I didn't see the proud man who kicked me out, but the boy who once scraped his knee and cried until I picked him up. A part of me softened, but only a part. Humiliation doesn't fade with half regret. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Dad, I'm not like you. I never had your strength. I just try not to fall apart, but I mess things up while trying to fix them. I get angry seeing you. Even when you've lost so much, you still stand, still smile. That eats at me." I closed my eyes, then asked, "So you hate me because I still have peace?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I hate that you live like you don't need anyone. Not even me." Those words hit harder than any insult, because he was right. I had always been the pillar, never showing weakness, never breaking in front of him. Maybe that's why he never understood the weight I carried. But this wasn't the time to dig into wounds. It was the time to settle matters. I stood, pulled a folder from the shelf, and handed it to him. "Read this aloud." His voice trembled as he read line by line. It was a new document, stronger than the last, blocking any attempt to sell, banning rental, and leaving full control of the property in my hands alone. He swallowed hard, eyes dull. "So that's it? That's it?" I said firmly. "I'm not throwing you out, but from now on, every step you take in that house will respect me, even when I'm not there. What I built will never again be used against me." He lowered his head and muttered, "All right." It sounded like surrender. He slid the papers into his backpack, whispered, "Sorry, Dad," and left. I didn't reply. I simply closed the door quietly. Because forgiveness doesn't come through words, it comes through change. And change I needed to see with my own eyes, not promises. That night, the silence inside my apartment felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just necessary. The radio hummed softly in the corner. The street outside kept its rhythm, and I sat inside with my dignity restored. Sometimes the hardest punishment is letting someone face their own shame in peace. No shouting, no drama, just truth pressed against pride. But my story wasn't finished. 3 days later, another letter arrived. Not from Daniel this time. It came on a grey afternoon, just as I'd returned from the bakery with fresh French bread and cheese in my bag. The doorman handed me a wrinkled envelope. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in small, neat letters. That alone told me it was personal, not a bill or a notice. I opened it carefully, the way you open a box of memories, and the first line made my chest tighten. It was from Claire. "Mr. Henry Walker, I hope you'll allow me to write these words. I don't know if you'll even want to read them, but I need to say things I never had the courage to say aloud. Not excuses, not quick apologies, just truth. And it's not for Daniel, it's for me." The letter filled 2 pages, blue ink on simple notebook paper. She confessed she had never stood against me, but also never stood up for me. That many times she saw Daniel's harshness and felt ashamed, yet stayed quiet, thinking it was just a father and son clash. She believed I was strong enough to handle it. But the day I walked away with my clothes in a bag, calm but wounded, she realized it wasn't a quarrel, it was a break. And in her silence, she had become an accomplice. Halfway through, she wrote about Ethan. She said he cried 2 nights in a row asking for me, calling me Grandpa from the ocean, clutching the blue bracelet I had brought back from Myrtle Beach. He even drew a picture of a little house with 4 people, me included, sitting in a chair with a cup in my hand. Claire said that picture cut her deeper than Daniel's anger ever could. "I know you don't want war, you only want respect. And I promise you, Mr. Henry Walker, if you ever wish to come back, even just to see Ethan, this house still carries shame for how we treated you, but also space for you, the very foundation we forgot." I folded the letter and left it on the table. For a long time I just looked at it. Because unlike Daniel's excuses, Claire had written with honesty. It wasn't manipulation, it wasn't defense, it was a confession, and confessions spoken from the heart have a way of piercing the soul. The words pulled me back to years ago, to the night Daniel and Claire told me they were expecting. It was a Sunday. They had made fried chicken with cornbread, my favorite, and slipped the news between laughter and nervous smiles. Claire hugged me tight that night, called me Grandpa Sparky because my tools were always scattered around. For a brief moment, I believed we would be the kind of family that stayed whole. But life teaches with pain, and sometimes it breaks more than it builds. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window, watching the city's lights blink like indifferent stars, uncaring of anyone's sorrow. I wondered if I should reply, if I should let her words reopen a door I had already closed, but part of me still ached, not from Claire's confession, but from the silence Daniel hadn't yet broken with truth. The next morning, with a heavy but steady heart, I decided to walk back to the neighborhood where they lived. I carried a plain envelope with me, handwritten, nothing fancy, only straight words from a father to his son. When I rang the bell, Claire opened the door. Her eyes were swollen, her voice hesitant. She reached out as if unsure, and I placed the envelope in her hand. "It's for Daniel," I said softly, "but you may read it too." She nodded, lips parting as if to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned, stepped down the stairs quietly, and left. Inside the letter I had written, "Daniel, silence speaks louder than the loudest words. You pushed me from your world, and for a time you succeeded. But what you don't understand is that this old man never needed to shout to be heard. You wanted the house, the reason, the control. I only wanted respect. The house remains mine, yet I will not use it as chains for anyone. But freedom always carries weight. Mine was earned. Yours, now, you will have to bear." Henry Walker. 2 days passed before an answer came, not by phone or letter. Instead, a knock sounded on my apartment door late in the afternoon. When I opened it, there was my Ethan, alone, the blue bracelet tight on his wrist and a drawing in his hand. His hair stuck up, his cheeks were red from climbing the 4 flights of stairs, and his backpack looked too heavy for his small frame. He lifted his eyes shyly, offered a crooked smile, then stared at the floor. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. "You came here by yourself?" I asked. He shook his head. "Mum walked me to the lobby. The man downstairs helped me up. I stepped aside, opening the door wide. "Well, come in. What kind of grandpa leaves Ethan waiting outside?" He walked in slowly, gazing around as if entering a place he had only imagined. And maybe for him it was a new world. That small apartment, hidden for so many years, suddenly became the ground for a reunion I hadn't realized my soul craved. He wandered into the living room and stopped at the recliner. "Is this where you sit?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Here, I think. Listen to the radio, drink my coffee." He placed the drawing on the little table beside it. The paper was filled with colored pencil lines, rough but tender. A house, his mother, himself, Daniel, and in one corner me, holding a cup. Above it, written in tiny letters, "Grandpa from the ocean." I lowered myself into the recliner, heart pounding like a young man on his first date. Ethan sat on the floor, back against the wall, and words spilled from him like a dam finally breaking. He said he missed me, said he didn't understand why his father fought with me, that he often heard his mother crying behind their door while Daniel paced restlessly. "The house feels strange now," he whispered. "It's the same, but it feels empty. Too big, Grandpa." His words cut sharper than any argument. I tried to speak, but no answer seemed enough. His honesty carried more weight than speeches made by men twice his age. So I went to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of chocolate milk, and grilled cheese sandwiches. When I returned, he was wandering among my things. His eyes had found the Myrtle Beach bracelet hanging from the lamp. He lifted the bracelet carefully, turning it in his small hands. "This one looks like mine," he said. I smiled. "It belongs to your sister." He laughed, and for a moment the air felt lighter. We sat together on the floor, eating quietly, the sound of our chewing filling the room. After a while, he looked at me with a serious face. "Grandpa, are you coming back home?" I drew a deep breath. "That house is still mine, Ethan, but my home now is here with myself. Sometimes it's wiser to remain where you're wanted than to force yourself into a place where you've been pushed aside." He didn't fully grasp my words, but I could see in his eyes that he caught the meaning, and that was enough. We stayed until the sky faded. We played checkers, scribbled in an old notebook, and he begged me to retell one of my stories twice. Later, his phone rang. I listened as he answered softly, "Yes, Mum, I'm fine. I ate, I'm safe, everything's okay." Then he ended the call and looked at me with a sudden seriousness. "Grandpa, Mum said Dad cried yesterday." I said nothing. A part of me was moved, but another part knew tears don't erase the act of casting someone out. Whoever breaks a bond must be ready to rebuild it, not just show sorrow. At dusk, I walked him down to the lobby. Claire was waiting in the car. She stepped out, embraced her son, and gave me a look filled with quiet gratitude. From inside the car, Ethan leaned out the window and shouted, "Grandpa, when can I come back?" I smiled. "Anytime you want, my boy. This door never closes for you." Back in my apartment, I placed his drawing on the fridge, held with an old bakery magnet. Staring at those uneven lines and honest colors, I realized what I was creating wasn't revenge, it was legacy. Not the kind counted in deeds or money, but the kind carried in memory. The image of a man who stood tall, who chose dignity even when it cost family ties. That night, before lying down, I wrote a new letter, not to Daniel, not to Claire, but to Ethan. I placed it inside a box with my old watch, a picture of his grandmother, and the blue bracelet he cherished. One day he'd read it, one day he'd understand. Because some stories don't need to shout, they endure quietly, strong as stone. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without the heaviness pressing my chest. Yet fate had another move waiting. The next morning, Daniel showed up again, this time carrying something I hadn't expected. I peeked through the window and saw his car parked outside. He sat for a long while, head bowed, like a man rehearsing words he never knew how to speak. I knew that posture well. Daniel had always struggled with depth. As a child, apologies came late. As a young man, he slammed doors instead of saying, "I was wrong." And now, even in his 40s, Pride clung to him like armor. But that day, when he finally stepped out of the car, his stance was different. He came wearing a wrinkled white shirt, faded jeans, and a face that carried both exhaustion and something I couldn't yet name. In his hands was a plain black office folder. He climbed the steps slowly, and when the bell rang, I was already waiting. I opened the door, and for a moment he just stood there in silence until he finally spoke. "I need to show you something." Nothing else. No greeting, no apology. But his voice carried less anger this time, more heaviness. He stepped inside carefully, like every move could set something off. Sitting on the couch, he opened the folder and pulled out a pile of papers, then pushed them toward me. "Read it. Everything's there." I took the papers, sat down, and started turning through them. Bank notices, debt statements, emails, and at the bottom, a handwritten letter addressed to me. His writing began with rage, but softened into something more raw. "Dad, I tried to sell the house because I'm drowning in debt. I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, invested in things that failed. You always warned me, but I wanted to prove I could do more than you. I wanted to feel smarter, stronger, but I failed. When you came back from your trip with that calm smile, it broke me. You had little, yet still shone, while I, with all I thought I had, felt empty. I threw your clothes outside because I wanted to erase that image, an old man still standing tall while I'm young but already broken. Dad, forgive me." I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and kept reading. "Inside this folder is everything I've hidden. Debts, bills, broken promises. I wanted you to know before you found out from others. It's not an excuse, it's the truth. If you choose to sell the house, I'll understand. If you want me gone, I'll accept. I just don't want to leave your life without at least trying to make things right." I set the papers down carefully and looked at him. His eyes were wet, though no tears fell. Those tears men hold back out of pride, but can't keep inside forever. My anger toward him hadn't disappeared, but it was joined now by something else, compassion. Not pity, but the sharp ache of finally seeing the twisted root of his pain. I spoke slowly. "Daniel, I won't sell the house and I won't remove you. But this isn't for your sake, it's for your son. Ethan deserves a home, even if the grown-ups around him are still learning what home really means." He nodded weakly, shoulders sinking. "But I also won't return there. That place isn't mine anymore. And you must understand, forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It's only the choice not to repeat it." He lifted his gaze to mine, and for the first time in years, I saw not the bitter man, but the boy I once raised, the boy who once called me a hero when I fixed his bike, the boy who trusted, admired, and loved. Maybe he was still in there, buried deep. He left the folder on the table, stood up, and hugged me without a word. The hug was uneasy, stiff, but not false. I didn't respond right away. Pain still has weight, and it takes time to lift. After a moment, I let my arms move, not out of forgetfulness, but out of choice. In that small gesture, I understood that perhaps, just perhaps, Daniel was finally trying. Before he left, he spoke quietly. "If you ever want to come for dinner, my boy would love it." I gave a faint smile, "We'll see." Then he walked out. I sat staring at the folder, lifted the papers once more, read his letter again, then once more after that, before placing everything inside the cabinet. Not as forgiveness, but as release. Life already places enough weight on our shoulders. We don't need to keep what isn't ours to bear. That night, I stayed on the balcony, the radio humming soft, the sky clear above, and my thoughts heavy with memory. I thought of all I had lived, the dignity almost stolen, the silence that kept me steady, and the strength that held me upright. But I knew one final step was still missing. The cycle wasn't closed. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office carrying a copy of my will. The same street I once walked decades ago, holding Daniel's mother's hand, registering his birth. Back then, I was young, nervous, but full of love. Now I returned alone, no ring on my finger, only an envelope and a certainty in my heart. It was time to decide what would happen to all I had built. I walked in, greeted the receptionist, who called me Mr. Henry Walker with a polite, warm tone. I sat in a hard plastic chair and watched people rush, some smiling, some afraid, some carrying folders like shields. I was calm. Age teaches that. After so many storms, you learn to breathe before signing anything, even the papers that guide your future. When I was called in, I saw Mr. Edward, the same clerk who had once helped me register a small plot left by my father. He remembered me. "Mr. Henry Walker, what an honor to see you again. What brings you today?" I placed the envelope on his desk. "I want to make a public deed of living donation with usage and protection clauses. I also want to set who receives what when I'm gone." He nodded and said, "Let's take our time and do this right." So I explained, "The house where Daniel now lives is still mine in law, and I would no longer let it remain a weapon hanging over me. I wouldn't throw him out, but he would never sell, rent, or change anything without my permission. That house would now carry a usage clause tied only to me. He could live there only as long as he respected me. If he crossed that line again, the right would vanish, but the deeper part came after. I asked to include another property, a small plot of land I had held onto for years, untouched, but now worth something. That one, I declared with firmness, I would leave only for Ethan, protected by irrevocable terms. When Ethan turned 18, that land would be his no matter what happened. No one could sell it, trade it, or use it as payment for debts. That small piece of ground would stay untouched until it became his, my direct gift, not of money, but of meaning. Mr. Edward stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "That's a firm choice, Mr. Henry Walker." I replied, "Life showed me that inheritance isn't just giving property. It's passing down a story worth carrying forward. And this boy still has the chance to remember his grandpa with love, not as the old man thrown out with his clothes in a bag." I signed every page, sealed it, collected the official copies, and left the office lighter. Not happy, not proud, just at peace. That cold piece of paper felt like a quiet letter saying, "I lived, I stood my ground, and I left my trace with dignity." On my way home, I passed the same park where I once played with Daniel when he was 5. I sat under the shade of a tree, closed my eyes, and let the memories come, his sleepless nights, his first bike ride, his first heartbreak, his small voice calling me daddy before he grew and forgot. Now those memories didn't crush me. They were simply part of my story. I never wished him harm, but I wanted him to understand that not all love comes with unlimited chances, and forgiveness is not a free key to repeat the same mistakes. Back at the building, the receptionist handed me another envelope. Claire had left it there. Inside was a drawing from my Ethan. This one showed a field, a tree, a sign with my name, and on the back written in his shaky handwriting, "When I grow up, I want to be like my grandpa. Stand tall when life tries to push me down." I sat in my recliner, took a deep breath, and let my tears fall. Not tears of sadness, but those that cleanse the soul after carrying too much for too long. That night I turned on the radio, and an old country song filled the room. It spoke of roads, of longing, and of time. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years I felt I had won, even standing alone. The next morning I walked straight to the window. The sky was bright blue, like Myrtle Beach, where I once walked with the sea at my side. I sat with coffee in hand, watching life unfold outside, workers hurrying, children with backpacks, an old lady carrying her bread bag. Life went on, both outside and inside me, but now lighter, free from silence heavy with bitterness, free from feeling like an old man only waiting for the end. I had finally learned that growing old with dignity is worth more than any material legacy. From that day, Daniel never disrespected me again. We didn't become close, didn't repair what was broken, and I didn't seek that. But when he looked at me, there was care, a pause before he spoke. And for me that was already more than enough. We spoke through my Ethan only as much as needed. I never asked for his love, only his respect. And when he began to look at me like a man, even without giving endless apologies, I knew he had learned. Claire slowly became part of my days. Sometimes she brought Ethan for lunch. Sometimes she called just to check if I was fine. With time, I saw that she was the one holding that family together, not with shouting, but with quiet strength. She also realized that what had happened was not a simple fight between father and son. It was an old wound that finally broke open, and each of us had to face it in our own way. I faced it with firmness, she with attempts at peace, and Daniel with the weight of shame. My Ethan grew up often coming to visit me. He started liking the radio, just like I did. One day he asked if he could have one of his own when he was older. I told him yes, but the most important thing was having something worth saying when the radio was silent. He laughed, hugged me, and in that hug, I understood everything. My true inheritance was already passed on. It was not the house or the land. It was the quiet lessons. It was the strength of not bowing your head when they call you useless. It was showing him the value of building peace for yourself, even when others try to steal it away. Today I write these words not for applause, not to make anyone cry, but to leave a mark. We can grow old with pain, yes, but never with humiliation. We can forgive without forgetting to protect ourselves. We can love without erasing who we are. My name is Henry Walker, electrician, father, grandfather. I was thrown out of my own home by a son who thought he owned it all, and now I live in a small apartment, but with my soul whole. They called me a burden, tossed my clothes in the yard, tried to sell what was mine, but they could not erase me, because my story was never only in the walls of a house, it lived inside me. If you have a father, a grandfather, or an elder near you, remember, even if he walks slowly, his steps carry a history you may never fully know. And if, like me, you have been hurt by those who should have cared for you, remember, you can still go forward, not with revenge, but with truth, courage, and dignity. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reached you in any way, share where you are from and send it to someone who might need to remember their own worth. Each day, a new story is told here. Father's advice. Stories that show, as mine does, that time doesn't weaken, it uncovers.